Here's the thing nobody is saying out loud about Top Gun 3. It has a glaring structural problem that both previous movies quietly avoided, and if the creative team doesn't fix it this time, all the horsepower in the world won't save it. We'll get to that. But first, yes, it's real. It's happening. At CinemaCon in Las Vegas, Paramount executive Josh Greenstein stood in front of a room full of theater owners and made it official. Top Gun 3 is in active development. The script is well underway. Tom Cruise is back as Maverick, and Jerry Bruckheimer is producing again. Cruise even appeared in a video presentation standing on top of Paramount's iconic water tank, declaring that the future looks pretty great from here. Classic Cruise energy. No release date, no trailer, no footage, just a declaration. And honestly, the announcement itself tells us a lot about where this franchise is and the impossible mountain it has to climb. Let's start with the context, because the numbers here are genuinely absurd. Top Gun Maverick grossed around $1.5 billion worldwide on a budget of roughly $170 million. That is a wild amount of cultural weight to put on a sequel to an 80s pop song vehicle about shirtless volleyball and fighter jets. And yet Maverick earned every bit of that legacy. So now what? The first sequel took 36 years. This one is moving considerably faster, which is both exciting and a little terrifying, because speed in Hollywood is not always your friend. Development actually kicked off in January 2024 when Paramount officially confirmed a new Top Gun was in the works, with Maverick co-writer Ehren Kruger brought in to handle the script. That alone was a smart move. Kruger understood the emotional architecture of the second film, how grief and legacy and mentorship were doing all the heavy lifting underneath the jet fuel. Then, in May 2025, Christopher McQuarrie publicly confirmed he was also writing the screenplay. McQuarrie and Cruise have collaborated on over 10 films together, including 5 Mission Impossible entries and Maverick itself. When McQuarrie is in the room, the emotional scaffolding tends to hold. He's been very candid that the hard part of these films isn't the concept. It's the execution, and that what truly makes or breaks them isn't the action sequences, but the emotion underneath them. That's not marketing speak. That's a filmmaker who actually knows what he's doing. Now here's the first significant piece of news that changes the calculation for this film, and it's a big one. Joseph Kosinski is not coming back to direct. According to reports from multiple outlets following CinemaCon, including Puck News, Kosinski's schedule is simply too packed. He has an untitled UFO thriller in development for Apple TV, and he's also directing Universal's Miami Vice reboot, which already has an August 2027 release date with filming set to begin soon. That essentially locks him out for the next 2+ years. Producer Jerry Bruckheimer has reportedly acknowledged this reality, and the search for a new director is quietly underway. Now before you panic, there's actually a precedent for this. The original Top Gun was directed by Tony Scott. When Maverick came along 36 years later, Kosinski stepped in and delivered what is arguably the best film in the franchise. So, the idea that a director change automatically equals disaster is not supported by this franchise's own history. That said, Kosinski's specific approach, the obsessive commitment to practical aerial sequences, the grounded visual language, the way he balanced spectacle with genuine human moments, that's not easy to replicate. Whoever Paramount lands is going to be starting from a very high baseline with not a lot of margin for error. The most interesting name floating around as a potential replacement is McQuarrie himself. He's already writing the script, he knows Cruise better than almost anyone in the business, and he has a proven track record of making large-scale action films that don't feel hollow. He's never been officially attached to direct, but the logic writes itself. If Bruckheimer and Cruise are going to trust someone new with the keys to this franchise, the guy who has co-written both Maverick and the current screenplay, and who has spent the better part of a decade as Cruise's closest creative partner, is the obvious candidate. The franchise has already survived one director change. Surviving a second one is possible, but the new hire has to understand that this series lives or dies on emotional truth, not spectacle. So, who's in the cast? Tom Cruise obviously returns as Maverick. Miles Teller as Rooster and Glenn Powell as Hangman are both in active talks and have confirmed their interest publicly. Powell actually went on record saying he had a production timeline in mind, the kind of specific detail you only drop when you've actually seen a real schedule and not just a vague studio promise. Monica Barbaro, who played Phoenix, is also expected back, partly because the Navy has been pushing for stronger female pilot representation in the franchise. That's a real behind-the-scenes dynamic that doesn't get talked about enough. The military's relationship with these productions directly influences casting and story decisions, and the same Navy advisors who helped design the hypersonic Darkstar jet for Maverick are expected to return for this one. Whatever aircraft end up on screen, they'll be grounded in actual next-generation military technology. The full Maverick ensemble. Lewis Pullman, Danny Ramirez, Jay Ellis, Greg Tarzan Davis, Manny Jacinto could potentially return as well, though nothing is confirmed beyond the core trio. Which brings us to the story itself. And this is where things get genuinely fascinating, and where that glaring franchise problem I mentioned at the top finally comes into focus. Think back across the first two Top Guns. Neither one has a real villain. In Maverick, Jon Hamm's Vice Admiral Kane functions as an antagonistic presence, but he's just Maverick's commanding officer with a different philosophy about how to run a mission. By the midpoint of the film, Maverick has essentially brought him around to his way of thinking. The actual enemy combatants in both films are faceless and nameless, jet-flying bogies from narratively ambiguous, unnamed countries who exist purely as targets. They have no dialogue, no character arcs, no psychology the audience can engage with. They are, dramatically speaking, furniture. Moving furniture that shoots missiles, but furniture nonetheless. For the first two films, this worked. The original Top Gun leaned so hard into the fun and the music and the vibe that nobody needed a three-dimensional villain. Maverick worked because 36 years of anticipation, an incredibly personal emotional story about grief and legacy, and the physical spectacle of real jets doing impossible things gave audiences plenty to hold on to. But Top Gun 3 doesn't have either of those advantages. The emotional engine that powered Maverick has run its course. So if the third film comes in with the exact same structural playbook, faceless enemies, abstract obstacles, no real antagonist with a face and a point of view, it's going to feel thin in a way the first two didn't. The audience will feel the absence of something even if they can't name it. The good news is that the thematic territory the film seems to be heading into actually creates a natural opportunity to fix this if the writers are brave enough to go there. Multiple reports indicate the new story will wrestle with drone warfare and the threat of AI in combat. The idea of autonomous systems replacing human pilots in the battle space. This isn't just fan speculation. Maverick already planted the seed for exactly this conflict. Admiral Kane's entire argument in that film was that drones could fly the mission more precisely and without risking human lives. Maverick's counter-argument was that the mission required human instinct, improvisation, the ability to read a situation and react in ways no algorithm could anticipate. The film sent him and his students to prove it, and they did. But now what? Where does that argument go from here when sixth-generation autonomous fighter programs are actually moving forward in the real world? This is where the franchise could do something it has genuinely never attempted. Give the other side of that argument a real human face. Not a cackling villain, not an evil foreign pilot, but someone who genuinely, philosophically, reasonably believes that manned fighters are an ethical liability because they put human beings in harm's way unnecessarily. Now, let's talk about the character arcs, because this is where Maverick left things and where Top Gun 3 has to pick them up. Rooster's arc in Maverick was about stepping out from under the shadow of a dead father and a complicated surrogate one. He spent the entire film questioning whether Maverick's choices cost Goose his life, and whether following Maverick's path would cost him his own. By the end, he'd earned his wings in a different sense, not just as a pilot, but as his own man. The third film has to give Rooster a completely new internal conflict, and the most natural one growing from where he ended up is this. He watched what the obsession with flying, with being the best, with living for the mission did to Maverick. He saw it up close. Now he's at the age where he has to decide whether he wants to follow that same path or build something different. Maverick himself faces the mirror image of that question. His entire identity has been built on the belief that human instinct in the cockpit is irreplaceable, that there are things a pilot can do, feel, and decide that no machine ever will. There's also the personal dimension that Maverick set up and never fully resolved. Penny is still in the picture. For the first time in his career, Maverick has something resembling a real life outside the cockpit. A relationship, a home, a reason to come back. And one more mission is going to pull him back in anyway, because that's the nature of who he is and what these films are. The question is whether this film has the courage to make that choice actually cost him something real. Whether Penny pushes him to choose between her and the sky, and whether the film has enough conviction in its own story to follow through on the consequences. The difference between a satisfying ending and just another adventure is whether the stakes feel genuine. Maverick earned the right to demand a real answer from its sequel on this front. The audience is ready for it. Jerry Bruckheimer has described Top Gun 3 as being in a photo finish with Pirates of the Caribbean 6 for which gets made first, with a slight edge going to the aviation sequel. Given that Cruise just finished Mission Impossible's final chapter and his schedule is clearing up in the back half of 2027, the timing could actually work out faster than anyone expects. Once the script is fully locked, everything accelerates. That said, the most realistic release window, accounting for the director search, pre-production, the insane lead time required for practical aerial sequences, and post-production, is probably 2028 at the earliest.